Les presento rápidamente al Presidium, independientemente de que conforme vayan participando, leeré el currículum de cada uno de ellos. Bueno, me presento, yo soy Alberto Álvarez del Campo, soy socio de una firma de nombre RSM. Y bueno, fui presidente del Instituto Mexicano también. Y aquí andamos cooperando con el Instituto, con CReCER, con Dimitri, que lo conozco hace años, Dimitri. Y bueno, básicamente el panel va a platicar de todo lo que viene siendo de los Objetivos de Desarrollo Sostenible, que por sus siglas en inglés es SDG, significa Sustainable Development Goals, o conocidos también como Global Goals. Entonces tenemos 17 objetivos SDG, incluye educación de calidad, trabajo decente, crecimiento económico, innovación e infraestructura, consumo responsable, protección del planeta, paz y justicia, y alianza para alcanzar los logros, donde vamos a platicar del examen del papel de la profesión contable y del desarrollo de asociados en el logro de estas SDG en la región. El logro de estos objetivos requiere de una colaboración significativa y eficiente entre el sector público y el privado. Aquí la importancia de nuestra profesión, porque habla de que la comunidad de informes financieros, contabilidad y auditoría son contribuyentes clave a muchos de los 17 SDG. Esta sesión va a mostrar las bases para este diálogo mediante la revisión de las megatendencias que se espera formen el futuro mundial y regional, analizar qué se necesita para crear un valor sostenible a largo plazo en este entorno de rápida evolución y examinar la función que podría desempeñar el sector privado y los socios para el desarrollo en el logro de los ODM en la región y qué instrumentos prácticos podrían utilizarse para facilitar este viaje. Para ello contamos rápidamente con la presencia del señor Peter Kronstrøm, quien iniciará su participación en un momentito, de la señorita Svetlana Klimenko y de don Edward Olowo Okere. ¿Sí? Sin mayor preámbulo, me permito presentarles al señor Peter Kronstrøm. ¿Ya tienen la presentación? ¿Ya está? Que no veo. Bueno. Peter Kronstrøm dirige el Instituto de Copenhague para Estudios Futuros en América Latina y es fundador de Future Launch. Cuenta con una maestría internacional en Administración de Empresas y es miembro de la Junta Consultiva en el Consulado General de Dinamarca y del Innovation Center Denmark en Sao Paulo, Brasil. Habiendo trabajado profesionalmente en Europa, Estados Unidos, América del Sur y Australia, Peter cuenta con una gran experiencia en gestión de la transición, cultura organizativa, comportamiento del consumidor, desarrollo empresarial y estudios futuros aplicados. Como buen facilitador, sus discursos y talleres son interesantes, transformadores e inspiradores a todos los niveles y se adaptan a grupos grandes y pequeños. Tiene una amplia gama de temas en el ámbito de los estudios futuros, entre los que se encuentran la cultura organizacional y la innovación, así como los paradigmas futuros para una gran variedad de sectores e industrias específicas. Nacido en Dinamarca, Peter se estableció en América Latina desde 2007 y después de haber vivido por varios años en Buenos Aires, actualmente vive y trabaja en Sao Paulo, Brasil. Debería de cambiarse a Río de Janeiro. Bien, señores, con ustedes Peter Kronstrøm, a quien les pedimos nos lo reciban con un debido aplauso de bienvenida.
Muchas gracias. Y quiero primeramente agradecer o CReCER para me convidar y o Banco Mundial Eu fico muito feliz de estar aqui abordando essa pauta e esse assunto mega importante para o nosso futuro. Bom, como eu vivo em Brasil agora, meu espanhol meio ficou misturado com português. Aí eu decidi hoje I'm going to speak this presentation in English, so everybody understand and doesn't hear my strange language. So I always like to ask, has anybody heard about Copenhagen Institute for Future Studies? No? Yes, good. Thank you, Dimitri. Yesterday. But I also like to say that we are a small institute, almost a little bit of a secret institute, but with an interesting and I think impressive history. So, as you can see here, in our name, Copenhagen Institute for Future Studies and/or Instituttet for Fremtidsforskning in Dinamarqués. Tenemos origen de we are from Copenhagen. We were founded in 1970. So we're an institute that has 46 years experience in working with the future. And I will just talk you a little bit about how we came about, because I think it's important for the speaker I'm going to say. Our founder was a former Minister of Finance in Denmark. His name was Thorkild Christensen. And when he finished being a finance minister, he became the General Secretary of the OECD countries from 1960 to 69. And as a finance minister, he had one declared goal in his professional life, also as the General Secretary for the OECD countries, and it was to protect the value that exists in society. So when he came back to Denmark, when he was 70 years old, with this profound insight after working in the OECD, that for every year that went by, he saw that the challenges in our world became ever more intangible and ever more complex. And in order to secure long-time value creation and to secure the values of our society, it what became more and more essential to have foresight, to prepare about what is going to come in the years to come, in order to not destruct value. One of the historic cases of the Institute was that in 1980, the Institute was alerting the Danish government and global industry that by 2005, a likely scenario was that China and India would be relevant competitors and new markets. In 1980, very few people had thought that that would be a future. And as we saw, the rise of China literally caused a lot of turbulence, especially in the Western world. A more recent example of some of our projections was that in 2012, we launched a report that talked directly about that not an unlikely future, the oil prices would drop below $50 per barrel. So between 2011 and up until the oil prices actually dropped, the Institute was often ridiculed. People, they thought it was very interesting, our work, but then they always came up and said to me, every time I presented this scenario, that is very good, but okay, oil prices will never drop. The coming of China, the whole development that is happening, it will never happen. You are far out with that scenario. So why do I talk about this projection? Because I think, well, now I'm living in Brazil, and I think that a lot of the turbulence that we are going through right now in Brazil, which I overall think is positive in the view of the development for a future that is better, but I think it's directly linked to the unpreparedness for the fall of oil prices. So when we are not prepared, when we are only thinking about tomorrow, something that is going to be the same as today, just a little bit more, then we get it wrong. What we need to prepare for is a future that can be drastic different. And let me just show you here. in our name, future studies, many people ask, is that a typo? No, it's not a typo. Because central to Copenhagen's approach is that the future does not exist. But what exists is a broad span of possible futures. So that's why we always talk about it in plural. What does that mean? That means that the future is now. The future is actually right here among us. It's not some faraway creature or monster that is going to transform us all. No, the future is here, and it's in our hand, and it's a possibility for us to create the future that we want in the present, but also a very heavy responsibility that needs to be taken serious. And I think that a conference like this, CReCER, and the job that you're all doing here is very much aligned with this agenda, to take the future serious and create where we want to be. Well, so that's a little bit of a start here. Let's see what's going on here. So one of the central concepts that we are working with is the megatrends or megatendencias. Megatrends are very different from normal trends. Like if I should have long hair, which maybe I shouldn't, or if I should have beard or long beard, or how my trousers should look, that is trends, no? I have a lot of clients that calls me and say, Peter, can you come and present the latest megatrends for 2017, please? And then I say, no, I'm very sorry. Then you haven't understood anything. Because the megatrends, they don't change from one year to another. They have a long durability, so that's why they make more sense for the planning. And the megatrends, the way we work with them at the Institute is that they last for 15 to 20 years. So we can more or less align with the megatrend in order to plan effectively for the future. And what I think is very important to what we're talking about in this conference is actually understanding the megatrend can help us unlock a potential fast track to a better future. Because what we say at Copenhagen is that we have a debate. How much can we create the future, or how much do we only have to adapt to the future? Yeah, I believe we can create the future, but most of the times we also have to adapt. Maybe 90% of the time we adapt, and if we are really lucky and good, maybe 5 to 10% of the time we are actually creating the future. But more important is to adapt. Because we say that if you want to hide from the mega trends, the shock will be even bigger. So for instance, just let me say here. So our mega trend we use to get greater flexibility in terms of what we want for the future, agility and creativity and innovation. Because the megatrends are creating the future, so we need to align with them. Right now, the Copenhagen Institute, we are working with 14 megatrends. But this is only a description we find is fulfilling to understand all the changes that are happening at the present state. But these 14 megatrends, there exist thousands of megatrends. So it's just one configuration. So just let me show some of them. I will talk more in depth about some of them. But we have one megatrend here is polarization. And what we are seeing the last 10 years is that there is not one single society on the planet of the Earth that hasn't been more polarized over the last 10 years. Even Denmark, which is a very equal society, Sweden, Norway, Finland, all societies, the polarization has been on the rise for the last 10 years. We believe that it contributed from other megatrends like technological development and globalization, amongst others. So that is a very important issue we have to address. How can we limit the destructive force of polarization? Another megatrend that is contradictory, you could say, you see here, is democratization. Democratization we are seeing now, due to technological development, more than ever, people on this planet now has able to give their voice, to be heard, to stand up to governments, to stand up to countries. And that is a part of a democratization process that is very fruitful and also aligned with transparency. Well, that was just a little bit to start with. Then we have another one which is demographic development, where we see we are living in a world that each time we are getting older and older. Another big change in the demographic development we see is the new status of the female, the new role of women that they're taking. That's also going to be a drastic change. So I always like to start as well talking a little bit about this quote. I don't know if you all know here Fidel Castro, I guess, no? But in 1973, Fidel Castro, he actually said, "The United States will come to dialogue with us the day that the US has a black president and the Pope is from Latin America." And that is exactly what happened. Do you think that Fidel Castro was an excellent futurist? Had he seen the crystal ball? No. Fidel Castro, he said this because he was sure that these two things would never happen, and would never happen simultaneously, and would never happen when actually Cuba were opening up and the US were opening up to each other. So he said this because he was sure that that would never happen, and then he got it wrong. So what our 46 years of looking into the future and working with the future has learned us is that we need to prepare for the most crazy scenario we can think about, and then be prepared for the future to be even more crazy. So actually, when we are wanting to plan ahead, we need really to think out of the box. So just another example we think is very interesting on how difficult really it is to say anything about the future. I don't know if you all remember when we first started having the cell phone. When the cell phone started to appear, no one, and I'm pretty sure when I say no one, could ever have imagined the transformative potential of the smartphone and the technology that we see today. Back in the days when the cell phone came out, people thought, that's great, we will talk a little bit more with each other, and that's it. No one could have had imagined the mega change the cell phone created. So what is this meaning? This meaning that today we can see ourselves, our planet, as 7 billion networks. And we can record everything, we can exchange information across the whole planet. That has become a new paradigm that we call radical transparency. I talked with a lot of accountants during this conference, and I think it's quite interesting because one of the main key issues in this conference, as I've picked up, is the transparency. The need for more transparent data, the need for data sharing. And I have good news for you. I think we at Copenhagen truly believe that corruption will come to an end much before many of us think, because they will have no alternative. The world is getting more and more transparent. Yeah, many of you probably do as I, maybe check your email or Facebook in the morning and in the night. You know, we even sleep with our cell phone. We are attached to it all the time, and by that we are giving away everything to everybody without even thinking about it. So our society is evolving to be a place of radical transparency. So we have to adapt to that. So one of the other changes that we see is something we called liberdade de ser dono, or freedom from ownership. We say that in the last part of in last century, we gained freedom from wanting, more or less. No? Never before in the world's history we have been more satisfied materially. No, we have houses, beds to sleep in. I know not everybody, sorry. But so what we are seeing is happening right now is that all these products that we have consumed are making people feel bad. You have reality shows that are helping people clean up their houses, throw away products. So we are seeing a radical move towards a society that we call freedom from ownership. And what is characteristic for this society is that the value of society is moving, or where we place value. In the old paradigm, value was in transaction. When you bought a product, when you consumed something, That is what the value was in the transaction. That is no longer the world we live in. Today, the value is in the relationship. You have Facebook, Uber, Airbnb as great examples, amongst others. That today, we are no longer buying products. We are buying access. We are buying access to experiences, and ever more we are also talking at Copenhagen that we are buying access to transformation. The value lies in offering a relationship and transformative experience. The problem with these paradigm shifts, or the opportunity, is that 90% of modern businesses are still selling products. And also for the accounting area, we are still measuring accountability in an old world that actually does not exist anymore, where the value has changed. The value is no longer in the products, it's no longer in the licenses, it's in the service, relationship, and experiences. So that's a key change. So what I've seen with the technological development of the smartphone, that every day the smartphone integrates more and more services and becomes more and more influential in what we are offering and how we are living our life. No? And this little thing is actually also creating the transparency paradigm I just talked about. Let's see here. So none of us could have guessed that the smartphone would be such a dramatic change. No? Now, for the next 10 years to come, what will impact our world as the smartphone? Actually, we cannot know. We cannot know. Our researchers at Copenhagen, our best bet is that the technology that will change the next 10 years the most is the major shift that we are seeing in the energy sector towards solar energy and wind energy. That will create that we need to develop a whole new infrastructure. So maybe that is what, when we look 10 years from now or looking back, that will have the most impact. We call it prosumers, that the lines between who is producing and who is consuming are blurring out. Today we have the guy from Tesla is launching solar panels. You know? So in the future we are all becoming part of the product. We are producers and consumers at the same time. This is also a very large value shift in the years to come. Another mega trend that I will mention briefly here is urbanization. We are today living in a planet where about roughly an estimate about 40-45% of the world population is living in cities larger than 100,000 people. For instance, where I live right now in Brazil, that's a reality for 85% of Brazilians. Brazil is one of the highest urbanized countries in the world, meaning that somewhere between 85% and 90% of the Brazilian population are living in larger cities. We are expecting the rest of the world to follow this pattern by 2050, and some soft estimate is that somewhere between 65% up until 80% of the world population will live in mega cities. We are also expecting to see cities that will become more than 100 million people. So that will also needs to be put on the agenda. How do we structure our society to still have a sustainable world in this situation? As I've told, as the technological development, there is one big difference from Copenhagen and many of the tech evangelists that we have today, like Singularity University. That yes, we believe that the technological development is very important and changing our world. But maybe when we look back, what has had the most impact on society for the last 50 years is no technology, but it's the new status of the woman. That the female has been liberated in comparison to the man and is going out to work. Maybe that is changing our society maybe much more than we can imagine. So, but anyway, not to look away from technological development, we are also seeing right now that 10 years ago, it was the entertainment sector that was being disrupted by technological development. Today, every sector out there is being disrupted by technological development. So one of the key things to this development is automation. Automation is something that is taking a toll. And I just, 3 weeks ago, McKinsey launched a report that actually said that 40% of all jobs we are doing today could be substituted by existing technology today. And we are having estimates that towards 2035, up until 75 to 80% of all the jobs we are doing will not exist, will not be necessary, because robots will be doing it. And next in line, now we had the factory workers, next in line are accountants, lawyers, and doctors. So how do we deal with this massive change where there is not going to be work for everybody? Rising polarization. These are issues that need to be addressed in how we plan our society, maybe with the implementation of citizen salary. So one of the last things that we are also looking at Copenhagen is the infrastructure. So if you notice Mexico City today, every one of us, we live in a society that is physically built 100% around the car 1.0. We expect the car 2.0, the fully automated car, we expect that will have equal transformative force on our society for the next 20-25 years to come. And we expect by 2035, more than 50% of all vehicles in the world will be fully automatic. That is a mind-babbling exercise to do. That will change our society. So, this is of course a very brief overview of some of the things that we are looking at and what will impact our future society. But I think it's sure to say that no one can do these changes alone. Industry, private sector cannot do it alone. And for sure, government and public sector cannot do it alone. So the only meaningful way to move forward is to emphasize on coming together and developing solutions, because we will need to transform. Otherwise, we will be transformed. And what, just on my final note here, is that, in order to unlock the potential of the future, we need to become protagonists of it and not victims. And what we say in Copenhagen is that if you're not directly involved with developing the future of your industry, of your country, of your society, of your work, of your organization, you can be sure that someone else is, and then you will be living in their future. So really, it is time to come together and figure out how we want to build society. And on this, that will be the last, and please, I'm open for questions later on, and also be free to come into contact if you want to consult any other thing. Thank you.
Gracias, Peter. Les pediría por favor que apunten sus preguntas y al final de la sesión le hacemos a los tres participantes las preguntas que tengamos, para no interrumpir ahorita con preguntas y luego otra exposición y más preguntas y así, ¿no? Bueno, continuamos entonces con la participación de Svetlana Klimenko. Ella es una especialista líder en gestión financiera del Banco Mundial. Trabaja en temas de gestión financiera pública, contabilidad y auditoría en los sectores público y privado. Representa al Banco Mundial en el Comité de Supervisión del Instituto Internacional de Auditoría Interna y es miembro de secretaría del Comité de Interés Público del Consejo de Normas Internacionales de Contabilidad del Sector Público, que son las famosas IPSAS, por sus siglas en inglés. Antes de unirse al grupo del Banco Mundial, fue directora de Deloitte y tiene un título de maestría en Economía e Ingeniería y es contador público certificado. Recibamos con un buen aplauso, un fuerte aplauso a Svetlana. Muchas gracias, Svetlana.
So I probably can use this microphone, so yeah. First of all, good morning. Thank you very much for joining us in this session. So in my part of the discussion, what I will try to explain is how what Peter has been discussing, all these major things which are happening around us, are affecting the way our governments function, the way private sector function, and how did they affect the development of the Sustainable Development Goals. But before I will start, I would like just to ask two small questions to the audience. First, how many accountants do we have here? If you could raise your hands. Perfect. So we have about 40% of accountants. And how many students do we have in the audience? Okay, perfect. So it's a perfect combination. So let me then start by talking a little bit about Sustainable Development Goals, which is probably something that many of you have not heard that much. So Sustainable Development Goals have been introduced in 2015. The UN, United Nations, has led the development process with the support of about 40 champion countries. A few of these champions have come from this region. In particular, Colombia was very active, but also Mexico. And what this group of countries tried to do is to come up with a set of high-level goals which affect all areas of our life, starting from health, education, environment, to governance, to the performance of institutions. And they also tried to formulate these goals in such a way that they will be universal, meaning that irrespective of where your country stands in terms of the economic development, in terms of the level of income, they still would be able to aspire to achieve these Sustainable Development Goals. So the other principle behind these goals is that there are 17 of them. This is a lot. So countries actually can decide what is particularly important for them and focus on that specific goals. So once again, Latin America is very actively involved in this process, and for many of your governments, goals related to education, to environment, to climate change are some of the more important ones. So, as Peter mentioned, the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals are expected to be achieved by year 2030. This requires a huge effort. It takes a lot of planning, a lot of funding, and a lot of organization. While we expect that the governments will be leading this process, as Peter mentioned, it is absolutely impossible to make this happen without active participation of the private sector. And as you know, private sector has mind of its own. People who own businesses, they have very astute sense of how and what they want to do in the future. So we need to present a very good, clear case of why should they care about something related to sustainable development. And here is where the importance of megatrends comes in. So I would like to focus on specifically on the three trends that Peter has mentioned. It's changes in technology, changes in demography, the fact that we live much longer, that now you probably can expect to work 20, 25 years longer than your grandparents or your parents, and that the population is changing in the way it lives. We have the urbanization, we have development, different style of life which is coming up. So the private sector, of course, sees all this happening, and it needs to incorporate these changes into their operations and strategies. So let me give you a couple of examples. When it comes to the energy sector, traditionally, the companies like ExxonMobil, like British Petroleum, they have been focusing on the carbon assets, right? On oil, on gas, because this has been seen as the main source of energy. Now we see more and more companies which actually focus on the solar energy. So especially in the emerging markets, China is a huge producer of solar panels. And why is this happening? It is because they see that there is demand, that there are markets. Another example is technology companies. Recently, I was in an event where the CFO, Chief Financial Officer of the IBM, was talking about the long-term strategy for his company. And what he mentioned is that in the past, we have been living in the world which had the blue-collar jobs and white-collar jobs, right? Here we have people who are aspiring to be white-collar jobs. What they see now is the emergence of the new type of jobs, which they refer to as no-collar jobs. And this is the type of specializations which are evolving and appearing so rapidly that the universities have no time to adjust and to train the needed number of people. So what private sector does, like the IBM, is that they develop their own programs. This CFO of IBM, he mentioned one program that they have in Africa, and it's easy to remember because it's called DNA. And DNA in this case means Digital Nation Africa. So they focus on the countries where they see the potential for new markets, where they see that there are a lot of young people, and where they see that the traditional provider of education, they simply cannot catch up, and they come into that spheres. So, to round up this part, we have the SDGs. We know that we want the private sector to participate in the implementation of SDGs, and we know that to convince private sector, we need to have a very clear narrative of how this would present new opportunities to them, and why focus on the sustainable activities, focusing on something that is good for the society will also not damage their financial bottom line. So if we will have this narrative, we pretty much will win this case. So in this context now, let's unpack the definition of the private sector. We always say the private sector, but this is something big and something very complex. So when we refer to the private sector, we usually focus on two specific subgroups. One is the real sector or non-financial companies. So these are the companies which would be involved into production of real goods and services. And the other very big, very important part of the private sector is the financial sector. Investment management companies, banks, financial institutions. So these are people who have a huge amount of money accumulated, and it is up to them. They have a lot of say in how these funds are going to be used. So here we talk about BlackRocks, about Vanguards, about State Streets. These are the companies which manage not billions, but trillions of dollars. And if we were to talk with these two different groups, we will need to use different narrative, different language to explain how engagement in the sustainable value creation, as we refer to this agenda, would benefit them. Now, there are some things which are helping us. First is that, especially in the OECD countries, we see this new phenomena when younger generations, and by referring to younger generations, we are referring to people who are 45 and less, are gradually coming to the position of power, right? So they now inherit assets of their parents, they get promoted within their companies, they can start making decisions. So, and this generation is much more aware about the need to do well while also doing good. So what we keep hearing from the senior management of these big, especially asset management companies, is that they have investors, they're investors, who come to them and who directly say, no, we do not want our funds to go to the company which is focused on the coal industry, for example. or we don't want to use our funds to support company which does some untransparent business in some remote part of the world. And this is very important because the financial institutions have to react to the demands which come from their stakeholders. Also, there are a few leading academic institutions, including the MIT, Harvard, Oxford universities, have been doing quite a lot of research to see what happens if company actually starts incorporating sustainable business practices, start focusing on the environment, start focusing on social responsibility, on good corporate governance in their long-term strategy. How would this affect the financial bottom line? And the preliminary conclusions are actually such that we can say that at the very least it is not going to hurt profits, and in many cases it actually is going to help companies to perform better in the long term. You see, this is a very strong argument, right? Imagine if you are the CEO of big company, if you are CEO of Cemex, let's use example of Mexico, and Cemex is actually one of the champions in this agenda, and you can explain to your shareholders that for us, following good practices and being careful about environment, being careful about the way we deal with the communities around us, we are going to be able to produce better financial results. It makes your life much easier. So, but this all is still a high-level strategic discussion, right? So to make change, we need to have tools. We need to have some specific processes which can help us to translate all this high-level philosophy and ideals into something tangible. And this is one of the reasons why we decided to have this session here, because accounting profession, anybody who deals with information can actually play a very significant role in this process. If you think about the markets, financial markets, which we are now trying to transform into in a way that they will think not only about the financial information, but about the broader information, which includes non-financial considerations. Markets function on information. The reason why we now have IFRS used globally all over Latin America, there is only one country in the entire Latin America which does not require certain type of companies to use IFRS, is because 20, 30 years ago, we were going through the process when the global financial markets were rising. And for the global financial markets to exist, we had to have the harmonized standards. So now we are getting to the next stage when we expect that the new type of markets which will focus not only on financial results, but on the double bottom line, as the private sector refers to it, is going to rise, which means that we need to have the information which will be able to support functioning of these markets. If you are the investment bank, if you are BlackRock, and you want to invest into a company which does good things in these areas, first thing that you would ask for would be what? The annual report, right? Of a few different companies, because you want to compare and you want to see how you are going to move your funds. So there are a few global organizations which are working on these areas, and I will just mention three of them. First of all, the UN has something which is called UN Global Compact. And this is the coalition of the private sector companies. They have the chapters in different countries, and then they also have the major meeting once a year called Leaders Summit. I went to this Leaders Summit last year, and it truly is very impressive because you see the champions of the private sector, CEOs, the opinion leaders, CFOs coming together and discussing how they can meaningfully change the way their businesses operate. And they're very pragmatic people, you know, they're not anchored only in ideals. They need to show to their shareholders that they bring value. So this UN Global Compact acts as advocate, as a champion for this agenda. Then you have the organization called Global Reporting Initiative, and 2 days ago we had here a representative, Latin American representative of this Global Reporting Initiative, which specifically focuses on developing the harmonized reporting standards which incorporate financial and non-financial information. This is what the IASB did for the IFRS. GRA is doing for this new set of standards. So in the United States, I also would like to specifically mention this because United States is a very important market and it has a huge amount of capital which can make a lot of difference. There is another organization, and some of you accountant students, you know that the United States still has its own accounting standards. So they set up the organization which is called Sustainable Accounting Standards Board, which is also focused on the development of the sustainable accounting standards, which will incorporate financial and non-financial information. So to round all this up, where we stand now is that there are objective trends which are happening around us. This is what Peter has been talking about. So there are changes which are coming whether we want it or not. The governments and the private sector incorporated this vision into this set of the Sustainable Development Goals to which your governments have signed up, and they will have to implement certain measures to get there. Private sector is a key player in this process, and for the private sector to really move, to invest their funds, to invest their might, we need to create a very good case, a good narrative, and to have tools which will enable to have this transition. And one of the key tools is integrated financial reporting, which probably is going to be a professional future to at least some of you. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Svetlana, por tu participación. Y a continuación nos va a presentar el señor Olowo Okere, quien actualmente es director de prácticas mundiales de buen gobierno del Grupo del Banco Mundial. Se desempeñó anteriormente en los siguientes cargos dentro del propio banco: consejero senior de la Universidad de Presidencia de Crecimiento Educativo, Finanzas e Instituciones, jefe de estrategia, prácticas mundiales de buen gobierno, director de servicios de operaciones de la región de África, gerente regional de gestión financiera en la región de África. Ha encabezado en estos rubros diálogos sobre políticas con y asistencia técnica para diversos clientes en una gran variedad de temas, incluyendo gestión financiera pública, contabilidad y auditoría del sector privado, gestión financiera operativa, adquisiciones públicas y evaluación y seguimiento en África. También ha fungido como representante del Banco Mundial en diversas organizaciones regionales y globales. Actualmente es miembro del Comité de Interés Público para las Normas Internacionales sobre Contabilidad en el Sector Público, y antes de unirse al banco en 1998, Ed trabajó en Nigeria, Gran Bretaña y Nueva Zelanda. Es licenciado en Ciencias Contables con altos honores por la Universidad de Maiduguri y cuenta con maestría en Contabilidad con distinciones por la Universidad de Lagos, Nigeria. Es doctor en Administración con especialización en Gestión de Cambio y de Finanzas Públicas por la Universidad de Bath, Reino Unido, miembro del Instituto de Contadores Públicos de Nigeria. Ha investigado, publicado en prestigiosas revistas internacionales y ha ofrecido conferencias en los niveles de pregrado y posgrado en Nigeria y Nueva Zelanda en diversos temas de contabilidad y finanzas. Además, ha sido galardonado con varios premios académicos y al mérito. Señores, con ustedes, Olowo, que le damos un aplauso de bienvenida. Muchas gracias, Edward.
Thank you very much. Good morning. I'm also delighted to be here with you this morning. I'm going to be building on the presentations already made by Peter and Svetlana. And I'm going to be making 4 points to bring all of this together. The first point is that going forward, based on what we heard from Peter and Svetlana, businesses can no longer focus exclusively on financial terms if they are considering long-term value creation. The second point I'll be making is that in the whole sustainability agenda, that there is a role for government to play. And that if government plays the role effectively, the economy as well as the people of a country will benefit. My third point will be there is also a role for integrated reporting in the whole sustainability agenda. Well, I think Svetlana already explained what integrated reporting is all about. Then finally, I will be explaining the initiatives that have been launched recently by the World Bank to bring together the private sector and the public sector to contribute directly to the achievement of the sustainable development goals that Svetlana explained. So, first point. Businesses can no longer look at the way they create value exclusively in financial terms. The reason for this is that there are a number of long-term sustainability issues that have no financial counterparts. And these issues can have material impact on the ability of a business to create value in the longer term. And I can give you some examples of those sustainability issues that may not easily have financial counterpart. One of it, for instance, is material security that can be affected, for instance, by global insecurity. I mean, wars and all of those issues that we know. There are also issues like depletion of resources that can affect the ability of a company to be able to create value in the longer term. There are a range of environmental issues as well. So if businesses really want to create sustainable value, then they have to pay attention to both environmental and social issues. And some of these environmental and social issues are driven by different things, different factors. For instance, there are environmental issues that are driven by industrialization. Like you are aware of issues like pollutions, like waste. All of those are driven by industrialization. The more we are industrialized, the more the issue of waste and pollution. Then there are issues related to environmental changes. For instance, climate change, which has been a subject of much debate. There is also degeneration in the ecosystem. That's also an environmental change. There are issues that have to do with global social issues, like security that I mentioned earlier on, which is driven largely by issues of poverty and inequality. If we look at today's world, both investors and consumers are now viewing the longer-term sustainability of a business from the perspective of both social, environmental, and governance issues. So therefore, it is important that any particular business pay attention to not only financial metrics, but also to issues that has to do with sustainability. So many of you are accountants working for companies. Some of you are students that will be working for companies in a few years. One thing that is very important that we need to be able to bring into perspective in the organizations where we work is that business is going forward needs to pay attention to managing the risks and opportunities associated with environmental and social changes. And if they do that, it will help them to be able to create sustainable value in the longer term. And I'm not sure if you are all familiar with the issue of value creation, but maybe as you just say, just make one quick statement about it. Value creation, we tend to look at it more in terms of the returns that are made to the shareholders, but also the quality products that we produce to the consumers. But a lot of people look at value creation more in terms of the wealth that is created for the shareholders. So we are talking, so when we say sustainable value creation, we are really talking about long-term perspective of that value creation rather than just a short-term view of it. And we know that businesses that don't pay attention to longer-term issues, then they may cease to exist. My second point is related to the role of government in the whole sustainability agenda. And I want to begin by saying that there are different views in terms of whether governments should be involved in regulation. There are those who believe that governments shouldn't be imposing standards or regulations relating to environmental or social issues on businesses. I mean, this set of those who hold this ideology, they don't believe that governments will really even issue regulations on anything. Their belief is that if there is information and there is free market, then the private sector will behave normally and things will just take care of itself. But as you may know, you can have some businesses that are responding to information and are doing things in a way that will enable them to be able to compete effectively in the market. But then there could be others who may not necessarily pay attention to it. So let me just give one simple example. You could have a company that is looking at the best way to use energy so that there is no pollution and so on and so forth. But then you can have another company in the same country or even the same zone that may not pay attention to that. So while one particular company may be conserving energy, reducing pollution, another company may be increasing pollution and not really conserving energy. So at the end of it, there may not be that much progress. So I would say there is still, because of this, some of these people that may not move with the rest of the people who are really progressing in the right direction, there is a role for the government. Okay? There is need for government, for instance, to set standards on environmental and social issues. There is also need for government to provide incentives or appropriate framework for businesses to be able to comply with those standards. And if the government sets the standards and businesses are facilitated to comply, then businesses are able to create more value, sustainable value. The country or the government will benefit, and the people in the country will also benefit, because private sector growth is really very important for every economy. As you may all know, the private sector, they are the ones that create jobs the most, and so the private sector is really important. Then that takes me to my third point, which is about integrated reporting. And integrated reporting, as I said, has a key role to play in the sustainability agenda. I will not explain what integrated reporting is all about because Svetlana already explained that. But I would just like to make a few points. The first one is, it is difficult to manage anything that we don't measure. If we don't measure something, we cannot manage it. And an example I will give, that I would like to give is, if somebody has an issue with his weight, or you want to be able to control your weight, whether reduce your weight or increase your weight, but you don't use a scale at any point in time to measure your weight, and you just say, okay, I'm going to continue to manage, to control my weight. How are you going to know whether you are actually heading in the right direction or not? So it is important that we measure something to be able to manage it. So, and what do we need? So we need information. The prevailing business model, as many of you in the room are aware of, is that businesses try to maximize short-term financial results in terms of the bottom line, okay, the profit. But so what businesses have also then developed is a good way to track and report financial metrics or financial results. So, for instance, companies produce monthly, quarterly statement of income that shows their net results. So businesses really they are very good in doing that. But if businesses want to consider sustainability, which we argued is very important, then they need to be able to also try to measure the sustainable aspect of value creation. And this involves what are essentially non-financial challenges. So the question then is, how do you measure and report non-financial challenges? What kind of metrics can a company use to be able to measure non-financial challenges? We already know we have ways to measure financial results, okay, but how do we do that? Earlier on, Svetlana talked about the standards that are issued by the International Integrated Reporting Council. I would say that these standards provide a good starting point, okay, that any company can be able to use to develop metrics and key performance indicators that goes much beyond financial terms, and then they can be able to start using this to generate reports and be able to manage the sustainability aspect of their operation. So finally, I would then like to make my fourth point, which is that the World Bank is partnering with the client's government in various countries to create opportunities for the private sector to directly engage in certain activities that will contribute to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. And I want to give you the context for that. There is a huge infrastructure gap across the world. And if you look at the various SDGs that Svetlana explained earlier on, unless those infrastructural gaps are addressed, it will be very difficult to be able to to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. The estimate for the financing gap for infrastructure globally is put at about between $1 and $1.5 trillion per year. So countries across the world, they need to invest about $1 trillion to $1.5 trillion annually to be able to address the infrastructure gap. Now, if we focus on Latin America as a region, the infrastructure financing gap annually, or the amount that needs to be invested annually in Latin America, is about $300 billion that should be invested in infrastructure. Currently, the region is only investing about $150 billion in infrastructure. Now, why the question that we may ask is, why is the public sector or government not investing as much as they should to be able to close the infrastructure gap? Public sector resources are limited, they are scarce, okay? So, but then the irony is that the private sector has been piling up a large amount of cash over the years. So I'll give you some of the information. The US companies, non-financial companies, because you have the banks and so on and so forth, but excluding the banks, the other corporations, they are holding a cash reserve of about $1.7 trillion as at the end of 2015, based on their balance sheet for 2015. They are holding cash reserves of $1.7 trillion. And this is not invested in anything that is generating any high return. This is in deposits, okay? Then, if we look at the British companies too, they have close to $500 billion in cash reserve, okay, that is earning little or no returns. If we look at all companies across the world, excluding financial companies, excluding banks and other financial institutions, the global cash, the cash reserves of private companies is estimated at about $7 trillion. And this is besides some other cash that is available out there from institutional investors, and these also are in $trillion. So the question then is, how do we have the gap in the public sector, and there is infrastructure to be financed. The government does not have all the cash that is required to do that. But then we have the private sector. They are holding a large pile of cash that is not really generating any serious return for them, because they are holding this in cash, okay, bank deposits. Then the question is, how do we then help to be able to move the money from the private sector to finance infrastructure in the public sector? And so that is the initiative that the World Bank is supporting, and it's called the Cascade. And this is designed to help crowd in private sector resources to finance infrastructure towards the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. So how does this work? The way it works is this. If a particular government, say the government of Mexico, has a particular infrastructural project to finance, say a power generating plant or project, the first question that then needs to be asked is it possible to arrange for commercial financing at low cost for that project? If the answer is yes, then rather than using public resources or concessional financing from Inter-American Development Bank or the World Bank or other organizations, other financial institutions, then commercial financing will be arranged for that project. If it is not possible to to find commercial financing because the private sector perceived some risks with respect to that particular project, or there are issues that are associated with, say, government or market failures with respect to that particular sector, or there are issues, other issues that will not allow the private sector to be able to then invest, then what the World Bank will do, working with the government, will be to help to address some of those issues. Like it could be helping the country to address some of the policy issues in the sector that are creating the risk. Okay, it could also be helping the government to deal with issues like pricing and regulation that may be creating risk for the private sector to get involved. There could also be things like helping to build institutions and capacity to be able to create the right environment for the private sector to come in. Then, if that then is able to address the issue, then commercial financing can flow and finance the project. But if still there are risks that still make the project unattractive to the private sector, then what the World Bank will do together with the government will be to find some risk instruments or credit enhancements instruments that can then be used to cover the remaining risks that is preventing the private sector from coming into the project. And so, hopefully, that will address the issue, and then the project can be financed by the private sector. But if that then does not work, then that project will then be financed from public resources and financing from international financial institutions like the World Bank. So, then just for me to start bringing my presentation to a close, how will this really affect the SDGs? Okay, if the private sector bring in their finance to finance infrastructure, what will happen is that government will have resources left to do other things that will contribute to the achievement of the SDGs. So essentially, funds are fungible. Money is fungible. Okay, if the private sector finance one aspect of government operation, then government will have more money to do some other things. So essentially, if the private sector were to get engaged in financing of infrastructure, it will benefit all the SDGs. But there are some SDGs, for instance, that will directly benefit, like SDG 6, which is on clean water and sanitation, SDG 7 on affordable and clean energy, SDG 11 on sustainable cities and communities, even SDG 2 on zero hunger. So in conclusion, but what I would like to say is that it's important that that businesses start managing beyond financial terms, that they start considering non-financial terms that are relevant for sustainability. And that there is opportunity for the private sector, the companies that you are working with now, or the companies that you'll be working with later, to be able to get engaged in financing of infrastructure that will contribute directly to the achievement of the SDGs. And finally, I think we are on our way, if that partnership can work, to achieving the 2030 SDGs. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Eduardo, por tu participación. Y a continuación les pediría, ya repartí por aquí algunas preguntitas, si pudiesen ir dándoles respuesta a las que ya tenemos, que nos mandaron en su papelito. Y también, si alguien quiere hacer una pregunta en vivo, pues aquí está el micrófono para que la haga, ¿ok? Pero mientras vamos a empezar con la que tienen por acá. ¿Ok? Primero las damas, obvio.
Well, thank you very much. I've got 3 very interesting questions. So how much time do I have to respond to them? Maybe 2-3 minutes? The questions are excellent, I have to say. One is more technical and one is more philosophical. So let me start with the technical question. And the technical question was, ¿qué hace el Banco Mundial para persuadir a los países a incorporar dentro de su marco legal normas que obliguen a las empresas a reportar información no financiera? So, in fact, there is, and I need to open my phone because I'm just going to read one little thing. Yeah, so SDG 12 says the following: ensure sustainable consumption and production patterns. So SDG 12 is pretty much setting the whole framework on how the private sector is supposed to function within the context of the broader SDGs. One of the targets under SDG 12, SDG 12.6, specifically asks the private sector to report on their non-financial information, to present the integrated information. So this gives us the high-level mandate. Then, of course, countries have to use this to incorporate and to adjust their regulations. There is one country, South Africa, which actually have been mandating preparation of non-financial information for public sector companies for a number of years. I don't remember exactly for how many, but I think it's now more than 10 years. And if there is one name that you should remember in association with non-financial and integrated reporting, it's Dr. Marvin King. He is South African, and they're famous King reports. If you have not studied it yet, those of you who are students, you should. King 1, King 2, 3, and 4. And pretty much he championed introduction of the legal framework in his country, in South Africa, which requires companies to prepare integrated information. And by now they have a very well-developed set of procedures. So what do we do as the World Bank? We certainly have a whole community of practice. It's a group of professionals who come from different parts of the bank who who on one hand communicate with the global standard setters, because as I mentioned before, there are a few organizations which are involved in this process. And on the other hand, we work with the governments at the level of the policymakers and technical specialists. So we would explain what it means, because the advocacy part is very important. People in your country who are responsible for making all these changes, probably it will be the equivalent of Security Exchange Commission. Dmitry, how is it called here in Mexico? The Comisión de... Yeah, exactly. It probably will be one of the key players. They first need to understand what is the value in this, and then actually preparing the regulations, it's the easier part in a way, because there are examples in the world. But we are here to help both in terms of the thought leadership and the technical work. So the other question that I have received was related pretty much to the fact that the United States just announced that they are going to leave the Paris Accord, and how is it going to influence the whole process related to sustainability? And this is a very important question, and in responding to it, I would like not to speculate, but I would rather present to you a few facts, and then it will be up to you to make conclusions. During the first part of the CReCER conference here, we had two very interesting speakers, both coming from the United States. One of them was the head of the sustainability initiative in the Thomson Reuters. You probably all know what is Thomson Reuters. And in his speech, he mentioned the following, that just a few days ago, the ExxonMobil, which you all know, this company had its annual shareholders meeting, and for the first time in the history of these meetings, the shareholders voted requesting ExxonMobil to disclose information on the way they approach climate change. This happened 1 week ago. Another speaker whom we had comes from the organization of the CEOs, Chief Executive Officers of the largest American companies. I believe the company has to have revenue above $4 billion per year to be a member of this group. And this organization just set up the Strategic Investor Initiative. And this initiative, it brings together CEOs of the large real sector companies with the CEOs of the major investment companies who are interested in promoting projects focused on the sustainable development. They had their first meeting a few months ago in New York. It was opened by the CEO of Citigroup, global CEO. It was moderated by journalists from the Financial Times. And the discussions, the quality of discussions was amazing, because on one hand it was very aspirational, on the other hand it was very practical. The third fact that I just would like to mention, probably all of you know who Mike Bloomberg is. So he is a very successful businessman. He was the mayor of New York, and he is now he leads the large group of mayors. In fact, a few months ago, they had a big meeting here in Mexico City, because your mayor is part of this group. And now in the United States, he is leading this sort of coalition of a few mayors, governors, opinion leaders, heads of the universities who are trying to find a way to work with the Paris Accord outside of the scope of not being a country. So they are trying to find a way to do this. So essentially, think about this. Think also about the fact that, as we have mentioned, there are objective changes in the world, and if one of the reasons why we now see so much focus on solar technology, which brings huge changes in some remote parts of the world, as well as not so remote parts of the world, is that now we have the technology which allows to produce and sell solar panels at the competitive prices. So when you have something like this, when you see that to produce the solar panel is much cheaper than to dig the coal, what will be your conclusion? And if you're a big business, how would you take this message going forward? So focus on the trends. And actually one thing that I also wanted to mention is that you probably have never met somebody like Peter coming from the company like this. But you may be interested to know that Bill Gates, whom probably also you all have heard about, he works with the company which is just like Peter's. They speak literally on a weekly basis. Google, another company which you all have known, they have the in-house person who is just like Peter. So stay tuned, see what really is happening, and keep your aspirations. Don't let the fashions or the short-term changes to affect the way you think about your future. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Svetlana. Muy amable. Le pasamos la palabra a Peter, quien tiene varias preguntitas.
Opa.
Si pudieses hacer un
Sí, también
campechano.
No tenemos mucho tiempo, ¿no?
Sí.
No. Muchas gracias para las preguntas muy buenas. Thank you for the good questions. I will just go quickly through some of them. They're very good, very happy. Para Peter, menciona que el futuro alrededor del 40% de los empleos actuales van a ser sustituidos por máquinas. ¿Es tan bueno o lo malo puede ser para nuestra generación a futuro? Soy estudiante. Yo quiero decir, I would like to say that, I mean, at Copenhagen, or when you work seriously with the future, it's very important to try to take out, when you do the analysis, it's very important to try to take out whether something is good or bad, because that will obscure your actually how you analyze the future. But as a key point, I think that it depends on what your approach is as a student. The way that students are today is very different than the way that students were 20 years ago, or only 10 years ago, or 50 years ago. I think essential is that you're not in school to learn a skill set. No, you're in university and you're learning how to learn and prepare for lifelong learning, you know? And I can tell you that when I studied communication 25 years ago, what I learned as a key thing was exactly that, how to learn. Because you need to learn the rest of your life and then change with it. And then at Copenhagen, we are relatively optimistic about the future. That actually, when you think about it, there has never been a larger number percentually on the planet that have acceptable lives. If you were born today or 200 years ago, the chance is much better that you have a reasonable life today than 200 years ago. So I think it's very important to be optimistic. I will go on to another question that's a little bit related. How do you perceive overpopulation as a risk in the future in a world of limited resources? Yes, that's a huge challenge. That's again another way why we need to stop only thinking about short-term value, and we need to try to find solutions together, private-public collaboration, in actually to create a better world without being afraid of being too hippie. But on this note, for instance, we do a lot of work on agricultural scenarios, and we know that there will be roughly around 9-10 billion people on the planet by 2050. And so in order to have food for these 9-10 billion people, the agricultural production needs to grow with a 7% a year on a global level. And right now, this growth is only 1.5. So we can see a very difficult future. But then we need to find solutions. We need to enhance technology. We need to enhance distribution, all of those kind of things. So I think I got a lot of, how long time do I have? Someone is asking me here to further explain the transparency. Of course, I mean, I don't know if that was clear in my presentation, but if I knew exactly how the future would be, I would probably be sitting on an island in Bahamas. but or maybe not, I don't know. But we cannot know, no, of course not. But we are really seeing a lot of things. For instance, I can talk about where I live now. It is in Brazil. And what we are seeing happening in Brazil is turbulence, but it is changing for the better. But it is all due to these new technologies that are forcing transparency. I had a very good talk with one of the big guys from PricewaterhouseCoopers, and we were actually debating this, you know. And I asked him, so what, as an accountant that has like your hands in the master on the global level, what do you think about this transparency thing? And he said, well, I really think, as a little bit as you also talked about, you know, we have no choice. The world will be radical transparent. My boss in Copenhagen sometimes says very provocative, you know, for companies, you have to prepare to be completely naked in the future. And the thing is that is I think that's a power shift for the people, because I, as an individual, can have no problem being naked with my smartphone because I have nothing to hide. I'm not making scandals that are depriving millions of people for healthcare or food or whatever. But big corporation, government, other people, they will have a lot of trouble adapting to this radical transparency because it will be so much more difficult in the future to hide the wrongdoings. And that's a positive. So we are very positive. Or what? You don't agree? No? Okay. What?
One only has to look at the taxation policies of certain large firms to contest that. It's a very benign issue.
Yeah. That's no, but of course we cannot know it. We cannot know it.
I agree.
And there's also we also look into, like, for instance, quantum-based computers, which will make it possible to have all the privacy in the world. So we need to evaluate, but we are quite optimistic on that note. Okay. And then I think, what do we have enough time? How current companies must evaluate megatrend? Yeah, exactly. That's a good question, because as Svetlana was just talking about as well, it is many people, they think, the future, it's so far away. It won't give us any return on the short term, so we only think about the next quarters in financial terms. But then I will tell you, then you will probably not be in business in 10 to 20 years if you keep on doing that. And for instance, how people, just one of our long-term clients is Siemens, and IBM we're also working a lot with. And I believe that all major companies that are here after 20, 40 years are companies that understand how to reinvent themselves. So Siemens, they were looking at future scenarios, like crazy scenarios, nothing to do with finances, but they were looking at crazy future scenarios 20, 50 years ahead, and that made them realize we need to get out of the phone industry. That's the same thing that IBM did back when they changed it from hardware to software. And so only looking ahead will help you to make those drastic shifts so that you will be relevant and still alive in the future. That's our belief. And thank you for all the questions. Everybody, please feel free to write me an email if I didn't answer your specific question here, and I'll be happy to get into a dialogue about the thing. Thank you.
Gracias, Peter. Como él comenta, si algo se quedó en el tintero, pueden pasar a verlo en la cantina. ¿No es cierto?
Okay.
Okay, adelante.
Yeah, so I'm going to be very brief. The first question is related to if we ask companies to start investing or funding infrastructure, will that make them to stop investing in countries like Latin America? So the answer is no. Actually, what this is designed to do is to encourage companies, both Latin American companies and multinational companies that have the money to invest in infrastructure in different countries across the world. Then there was part of that question was, will the effect of what we are doing, what we are trying to do, will it not be like opposite of what is desired? The answer, again, is no. Companies are already doing what is called PPP, public-private partnership, whereby private organizations, they are financing road or financing airport or financing power generations or stuff like that. So this is really about systematically scaling up the involvement of private sector in financing of public projects. Then the last part of the question was, if private sector fund public projects, how will you protect the extra public profit against corruption? So the profit is going to be made by the private corporation, that is investing. It will be a project they are investing in. But just to say, there will be greater transparency in the way these companies are selected, and there will be good arrangements to ensure that there is that transparency. Then there was a question about how can you control the flow of illicit money, illegal resources, into the public projects, So what I would say is that hopefully companies that will be coming forward to finance infrastructure will be credible private companies. And then there will be a process also to do due diligence on these companies that are that wants to finance public infrastructure. And I should also mention that those who are engaged in illicit finance flows, those with illegal resources, that governments and the international community, they are after them, So I think they will not really want to come forward and say they want to partner with the government or finance public projects. I think these are guys who should be hiding their money away from the government, So to that extent, it's unlikely that illegal money will come. It's not impossible, but it is unlikely. Then I've been asked to comment on the impact of the potential impact of on public finances of properly accounting for PPPs and service concessions. So I think it's the impact is going to be really very great. Currently, there are hidden liabilities in the public sector because of the way government is accounting. Some of these concessions, PPPs, they are not reflected on the government balance sheet. But I think if they are accounted for transparently, then we will get the true picture of government finances, and then government will be able to better manage their liabilities, including contingencies. So, and I think the IPSAS accrual that are being developed, provides a good basis for that transparency in reporting of PPPs and concessions in the public sector. Thank you.
Gracias, Eduardo, muy amable, muy amable. ¿Alguna otra pregunta? Tenemos 2 minutitos. Por allá la señorita.
Good morning, I am Nelly and I am a student of UNAM. And more than a question, I have a comment. I think the younger generation must to learn of the elders, because the elders are the leaders of the companies. And in some point in the future, we are going to be the leaders. And I think the fusion of the vision about the business is changing. It says, in my school, the vision always is be honest, be ethic, because this is the exit to the business. And I think the best option to fight the corruption, it's be honest with everybody. It says, if I honest like an accountant, with my stakeholders, customers, workers, my business will be held. Okay, and so the leaders have other visions because his formation educate was different than me, and I must learn about them, and in some point in the future I will be the leader with two visions, and I can offer to my stakeholders and customers a best service, the best service, and it's all. Thank you.
Muy bien. Totalmente de acuerdo. I'm agree. ¿Algún otro comentario, preguntita? ¿Por acá? Bueno, primero las damas, ¿no? Ladies first. Bueno, por ahí levantaron la mano. ¿Son mis nervios?
Okay, thank you, Peter. You had a question about, well, it was about there are many people in the world and there is not enough food for them. And you were talking about we need to grow up the production of food about 7%. And I was thinking which could be a good answer for that because I have heard a lot of times that the meat industry, cows, pork, and all these things, they make great pollution too. So how to equilibrate that?
Well, thank you for the question. But we're quite optimistic on the development of new technologies, and what that is really going on a lot, especially in the agriculture right now, of new technological startups are happening. Robotic agriculture as well, automated agriculture, horizontal agriculture in cities. So there are happening a lot of changes. I think that, so technological wise, I'm not so worried. We can also today we are very close to being able to produce artificial meat that has never killed anyone, etc. What I think is the really big problem is, I'll give you an example from Brazil. Brazil has one of the highest state-of-the-art agriculture institute in Brapa, and the Ministry of Agriculture is excellent as well. But the problem is how to get these new technologies and these new practices disseminated out to also the countryside. So I think that that's going to be one of the challenges. We actually have the knowledge on how to use residuals and other things, but I think that the big challenge is actually how to get this knowledge out to everybody.
Svetlana, que nos pide la palabra.
Yes, I actually wanted to respond to the comment about leadership, because you are spot on. Leadership probably matters much more than anything else. In the context of the private sector, a lot of leadership is concentrated in the hands of the boards. So two interesting things are happening now. First, in Europe, there is a very strong movement to support representation of women on the boards. So in a few European countries, in the last few years, they have passed the law which requires companies to have at least 40% of women on their boards. And this is, from what I hear, really changing the way the whole process is going, the way discussions are being held, the way decisions are being taken. So girls, don't be shy to ask questions. You know, probably it's not yet here, but in the next 10, 15 years, your country is going to be there as well. Another thing which is interesting about the United States is that you probably have read that Europe, for one or another reason, has more advanced discussions related to the sustainability, to the long-term value creation than the United States. And apparently, one of the reasons to this is that Europe has stricter laws on when people have to retire from the boards. The US doesn't. So, on average, the US board is 7 to 9 years older than the European board, because you have this whole generation of baby boomers who are still there. So what the American private sector is saying is that in the next few years, the baby boomers will depart. They will have the new generation coming on the board, and this certainly will change many things.
Por acá una pregunta, sí. Ya ven, no estaba nervioso.
As you said, it's more like a comment, like complementing what you said. I know pretty well this company called Unilever.
Yep.
Unilever goes pretty along with the global goals, sustainable goals, also with the part of collocating women on higher positions. They have their statistics regarding how many women are on top positions and also regarding the work level. But as you were saying, the CEO of this company is Paul Pullman,
Yep.
that is on the baby boomer generation. But all the people that is under him,
Are young.
young. The company has a complete young initiative as Google, as many other companies. But that's the fact that he's a baby boomer does not stop that younger people have the initiative and the ideas to propose new methods of doing things. This company really supports the new ideas, supports the change, and they are the, for me at least, are the bigger proof that the sustainability can be achieved, given that they have lower in half their expenses, but they have double their results.
Yeah. And for the accountants in the room, Unilever actually did something revolutionary because he decided not to have the quarterly calls. Usually private sector is short-term driven because every quarter there is a big call with media, you all know all that. So he decided not to do this, and it was a big gamble, and it paid off. His stock price did not go down. So now many other companies are looking at this.
Yeah, so that will be.
Pues muy bien, señoras, señoritas. Muchas gracias por su participación, por su asistencia. Y antes de retirarnos, me voy a permitir entregarle a cada uno de nuestros expositores un reconocimiento por parte de lo que viene siendo CReCER, del Instituto Mexicano de Contadores Públicos. En primer lugar, a Svetlana. A Peter. Gracias. Y a el doctor Eduardo. Doctor, muchas gracias. Bien, pues muchas gracias. Tenemos el receso.